On April 16th, 2025, the United Kingdom Supreme Court made an amendment to the Equality Act of 2010. This amendment legally codified the definition of woman under biological sex. Dr. Michael Foran, a lecturer at Glasgow University, explained that while trans women are still protected under the law, that this judgment has made it clear that it is lawful to exclude biological males from female-only services, where those female-only services are lawful under the Equality Act. Most public services, like toilets, will be. Of course, what this means for trans men is left up in the air because transphobes rarely consider them in these conversations.
Because how are you going to stop a man, a normal man, going into a woman's toilets and saying, I'm a trans man? And so I think we have to look at I don't
follow that logic.
Why?
Because the point is that we're saying that people who are biologically men shouldn't be using women's toilets. That's the point of this ruling, among other things.
But a trans man is biologically a woman.
Someone who's transitioned from being a woman to a man is...
And so they would then have to use women's toilets.
I think this...
And that's the problem.
This challenge to the act was brought by the transphobic group For Women Scotland, or FWS, a group formed in 2018 that has, from my research, done absolutely nothing about women's rights and only exists to perpetuate transphobia. They are a feminist organization with no feminist ideology or political interest outside of harassing trans women, despite this being, quite frankly, a horrible fucking time to be a woman in the world. It was shared that J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, donated £70,000 of her own money to helping fund this group and their challenge. She has had long ties with this group and in 2021 called these women her sisters. This is £70,000 that she's earned in royalties from the Harry Potter franchise from people who participate in that fandom financially, despite knowing, as of 2018, where her money goes to. So, congratulations! Once again, the conversation arose around consuming the Harry Potter IP, a conversation that has now expanded to include the fandom at large, things like fan fiction and fan art. For me, as someone who has spoken about this issue before, links everywhere, I have tried largely to support my trans colleagues and allow them to speak on this issue themselves and lead that conversation, especially since I don't consider myself to be a perfect ally. I think considering yourself to be a perfect ally is just sort of like an ego stroking, and I do still read fan fiction. But I think we've reached a point in this entire conversation where cis people who still want to have a toe in this particular IP need to, quite frankly, get a harsh fucking reality check, because the shock that people feel about this, about J.K. Rowling using her money this way, feels very disingenuous. This is J.K. Rowling's passion: harassment, bigotry, and then crying about it. Peak white woman behavior. While I'm going to link down below to the commentary of trans women specifically speaking about this topic, because I think it's important to highlight and uplift those voices, I am making this video because just the same way that people tend to believe race issues coming more from white people, hopefully me as a cis woman talking about this to other cis people will allow them to actually hear what is being said and not just project all of their weirdness onto this topic. Because I understand that people have questions. The problem is you're not actually opening your ears. Hello, as you can tell from the hair, the nails, and everything else, this was filmed later. This is part of the addendum. Between filming and editing things, stuff popped up, so I just wanted to come in, add a little bit of, information to what we're talking about. I also realized that I pronounced J.K. Rowling's name in the wrong way, but I did look it up, and she does not care, so I don't either. So yeah, if you see this face, because we're adding in some more context to the story.
She says the idea came to her mysteriously, and in a flash, a fully formed boy took shape in her head.
J.K. Rowling first published Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in 1997. If you were in the United States, it was published under Sorcerer's Stone because they didn't think that American kids would know what a philosopher was because it was too archaic according to Scholastic. And deadass, that's a little bit disrespectful. However, I will concede that the UK title is better and makes more sense. The Philosopher's Stone is something that already existed in fantasy, but part of the appeal of Harry Potter is that they don't really have to have a broad understanding of fantasy to be able to access the book. So I get going from philosopher to sorcerer. That book and the subsequent 6 went on to become a massive phenomena in publishing that has yet to be truly replicated. The series has sold over 60 million copies, translated into over 70 languages, and is sold in over 200 countries. The New York Times Children's Literature Bestsellers list was created because of the popularity of this particular book series. It would then spawn successful movies that have generated over $7 billion for Warner Brothers, and is now getting a TV reboot, but we'll put a pin in that. We will get back to that later. The franchise has also produced pretty okay but kind of meh video games and a collection of studio parks and tourist attractions across the United Kingdom, and particularly in Scotland. Forbes reported that J.K. Rowling's biggest cash cow now outside of the books is actually Universal Studios' Wizarding World attraction. Millennials and younger are the biggest bulk of the fan base because we literally grew up with the series. It, like Star Wars, was popular enough despite being nerdy and in a niche genre that it crossed over, that everyone consumed it. There became a shared cultural language in many ways around these characters. People teach classes using Harry Potter as a touchstone. That naturally has made Rowling and Warner Brothers a lot of money. J.K. Rowling is one of the richest people in the world and the second highest paid author after James Patterson, with the former now having spent the last 7 years making her anti-trans stances the overwhelming part of her public branding. Like, overwhelmingly so, which has been especially harmful and damaging because of what Rowling represented. There have always been criticisms of Rowling's writing, but she was known as a left-leaning activist for the majority of her career, frequently giving to charities, especially ones surrounding domestic violence, advocating for immigration, and being a major philanthropist. Her series, whatever you think of the writing or now in retrospect, was a life raft for many people across the world. Some of the words she wrote resonated and helped queer people come out, including trans people. When she wrote "Sometimes we sort too soon" in the book by Dumbledore to Snape, in reference to the sorting hat that puts 11-year-olds into Hogwarts houses that are meant to represent different dominant personality traits, something, you maybe shouldn't do to a 12-year-old, it was a sentiment that many queer people could and still do understand. That is what has made what happened to her such a deep and personal betrayal to so many. Of course, there is the point that this series never actually interrogates this at depth and plays into the binary nature of these houses on a morality scale until the very, very, very end. But I digress. Part of why this transphobia has been so dramatic of a change is because it felt so disjointed from who Rowling had been politically. What is true to the fandom consistency part of this conversation is the aversion to having any in-depth conversations about the problematic things written in the book series itself. In the years before the issue of Rowling's transphobia encompassed conversations about the series, there had always existed some areas of criticism about Rowling and her work. The casual fat phobia, especially when it came to people who were good fat or bad fat. If you are a good character, you are warm and cute, but if you are bad, it is disgusting and an expression of excess or taking up space in a bullying way. The weird writing around the mythology of the house elves. House elves are on the one hand inspired by brownies, actual creatures from Celtic mythology, but then became a messy allegory for actual slavery.
I'm a brownie. I clean houses.
Before you devour the inhabitants?
Try to stay out of the way. Mostly I work at night. So quiet. You won't even know I'm there.
Brownies in mythology are fake creatures that clean homes at night, but are very easily offended if not treated well, and will leave homes that forget to treat them properly. They have a lot of autonomy in that way. House elves, other than Dobby, very much fit this dynamic of wanting to do work. However, Dobby does want to be free and is represented in a way that makes his situation look more aligned with slavery or indentured servitude. So when we get storylines like Hermione's SPEW, the narrative is confusing in how it handles this issue by treating her with a sense of mockery for not understanding that they don't want to be free, but then they've established this as a horrible situation where these creatures are being abused. So which one is it? Nearly all of Rowling's non-white characters have horrible names, serve very disposable roles in the plot. There is really no relevant non-white character in the stories, which, is disappointing, but not shocking. There are the anti-Semitic tropes, and of course how mean the books are to women who do not fit a particular standard of being pretty, but not intimidating, but also smart. Fleur Delacour getting shitted on by everybody in the 4th and 5th book is a clear example of that. People who read fantasy, especially children's fantasy, had always pointed out how derivative the series was of older works that were more niche. For example, I remember when I finally watched The Worst Witch and being very kind of like, not shocked, but very aware of the comparisons between it and Harry Potter.
I'm sure you want the school to pass this inspection just as much as we do, Mildred, and given your tendency to cause calamity, it would be preferable to keep you out of the inspector's way.
What do you mean, Miss Hartbroom?
Hide you.
Sci-fi writer Ursula K. Le Guin once commented when asked about comparisons between her Earthsea books to Rowling's series. What's the difference between being influenced by a body of work and admitting it, and being influenced by a body of work and not admitting it? This last is a situation, as I see it, between my A Wizard of Earthsea and J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. I didn't originate the idea of a school for wizards. If anybody did, it was T.H. White, though he did it in a single throwaway line and didn't develop it. I was the first to do that. Years later, Rowling took the idea and developed it along other lines. She didn't plagiarize. She didn't copy anything. Her book, in fact, could hardly be more different from mine. In style, spirit, everything. The only thing that rankles me is her apparent reluctance to admit that she ever learned anything from other writers. When ignorant critics praised her wonderfully original in inventing the idea of a wizard school, and some of them even seemed to believe that she had invented fantasy, she let them do so. This, I think, was ungenerous, and in the long run, unwise. Shout out to Ursula K. Le Guin. Read The Dispossessed. Le Guin also said in 2004, "I have no great opinion of it, the Harry Potter books. When so many adult critics were carrying on about the, quote, incredible originality of the first Harry Potter book, I read it to find out what the fuss was about, and remained somewhat puzzled. It seemed a lively kid's fantasy, crossed with a, quote, school novel, good fare for its age group, imaginatively derivative, and ethically rather mean-spirited. I am not someone, or at least I try not to be someone, who has decided retroactively that the books have no literary value. I have literally helped be part of a Harry Potter class when I was in college that I helped teach and proctor. The books have value, as do most books. But if you look at them just critically as a text, you can tell that there is a massive disconnect between the first few books and the last set. You can tell that there are ideas and threads that Rowling starts with and puts together that do not pay off in any kind of way. There are so many plot holes, missed opportunities, incomplete character arcs, a lack of real world building when it comes to the magic legal system, the blood purity stuff. All of it's just very lazy allegory when you dig a little bit deeper. And a lot of the character relationships are just never touched on in ways that could add more depth and originality and care to a series that wants to say so much about World War II and the rise of fascism while not really getting any of it. For example, the Blaque sisters Narcissa Malfoy, Bellatrix Lestrange, and Andromeda Tonks are based off of the Mitford sisters. The Mitford sisters were part of a sibling group of 6 sisters and a brother from an aristocratic British family that had become very culturally relevant during the 1930s, with 2 sisters, Diana and Unity, becoming fascists, like capital F fascists, and Hitler supporters. One, Jessica, becoming a communist. Another, Nancy, a moderate socialist and novelist. Deborah, a liberal socialite. And finally, Pamela, an alleged lesbian. Because with those numbers, there's got to be one in the family. Fun fact, Jessica's daughter went on to marry a Black Panther, and their child is James Foreman Jr., a prominent Black academic who wrote Locking Up Our Own and is the co-founder of the Maya Angelou School in Washington, D.C. And for the audience that cares about this, he is married to a Black woman. So you have this family of characters inspired by this very real family bond, and it never comes up to mean anything. Like, it's almost comical how little this allegory matters in the grand scheme of the book. I mean, we don't find out until book 5 that Sirius Black is related to Draco Malfoy. Tonks is killed by her aunt. Tonks is Draco's first cousin. Harry Potter's godson is Draco Malfoy's first cousin, twice removed. This is why there's dreary fan fiction, guys. And it just doesn't even make logical sense that we don't find this out until Order of the Phoenix, because you mean to tell me that in book 3, where Sirius is still considered evil and he's out there attempting to kill Harry, Harry's biggest op isn't out here like, shout out to my cousin. It is, like many of the racial and social commentary, very, very painfully superficial. But again, to an audience who would have read these books as kids and aren't necessarily like digging around in World War II history, like World War I, World War II history, it's not something that comes up until you do a deeper analysis of the work. Rowling has been able to capitalize on being this crafter of youthful imagination, this possibility of adventure. Just like Once Upon a Time, people very likely dreamed of finding a wardrobe that would take them to Narnia, people actively wanted their Hogwarts letter. The promise of escapism is sometimes more important to readers than anything else. And those nostalgia moments create a barrier among people who are able to grow up with the series and see it as something beyond that first layer, and those who just want to stay in Neverland.
On a personal level as well, because I've always had my own suspicions about this. Dumbledore being gay.
Rowling's relationship to the LGBTQ community before 2018 was overall positive, mostly. The 2 big statements she made that were of interest to the community was the reveal that Albus Dumbledore was gay, and that lycanthropy in the books was an allegory for HIV and AIDS. We'll start with that one. In the 3rd book, Prisoner of Azkaban, we are introduced to the character of Remus Lupin. And would you believe a secret werewolf with a name like that? Subtle. Within the world of Harry Potter, magical creatures are considered second-class citizens, and werewolves are stigmatized because of a fear that they will bite people and turn them into werewolves. Firstly, we have to discuss the trope of fantastical racism. This will be a larger discussion on here at a later time because it will allow me to talk about one of my favorite hyperfixation shows, Defiance, at long last. To sum it up, fantastical racism uses mythological creatures and other imaginary groups to stand in for the oppression of real-life marginalized peoples, often as an allegory, or sometimes in tandem like True Blood. And often it is poorly handled. So in terms of HIV and lycanthropy, HIV is a virus that attacks the body's immune system that can be transferred through blood and certain bodily fluids: semen, preseminal fluid, pre-cum, rectal fluids, and vaginal fluids. You can get it from sex, sharing needles, blood transfusions, etc. AIDS is the last stage of HIV infection that occurs when the body's immune system is badly damaged because of the virus, usually because there is no medication. On a purely surface level, I can understand how when monsters are allegories for a lot of real life ills in our world, or discrimination and mental illness, as messy as it is, I could get why this would be like a first draft idea, right? But then you go a little bit deeper and you start to ask, why did you make this character choice for this particular STI? Lupin was turned into a werewolf as a child by Fëanor Greyback. Greyback does this because Lupin's father makes a statement that werewolves are soulless, evil, and deserving nothing but death after Greyback attacks two muggle children, right? So in this allegory for HIV, we have two named werewolves of importance, right? One is a victim of discrimination and is like narratively forced into a heterosexual relationship in order to have a child and then die tragically for the narrative. J.K. Rowling said she wanted an orphan, so sorry, Remus, you have to be straight and reproduce and then die. And then the other is an active child predator that wants to spread his condition to younger and younger people. You see how this is weird? The allegory only works if Lupin exists or if Greyback isn't a massive predatory cliche, but it's not. Plus, to have an HIV metaphor with a heterosexual man and a child predator representing a condition that at large impacts the queer community and marginalized people just feels very inelegant and cheap. It's also important for my American audience to understand that HIV and AIDS was much worse here than it was in the UK and other parts of Europe. Back in 2014, Michael Hobbs, friend of the show, wrote about this for the New Republic. Almost immediately after those first tests, Western European countries installed needle exchange programs, gave out free syringes, and established opiate substitution treatment. Germany even got needle vending machines. By 1997, England and Wales were giving out 25 million free syringes per day, anything to keep the virus from spreading, even if it meant making it a little easier to be a heroin addict that day. The United States, on the other hand, refused to provide federal funds for needle exchanges or even fund research into whether they were effective. Exchanges were established in some cities. By 1990, New York City was distributing 250,000 syringes a year, but they never achieved the coverage of the countrywide programs in Western Europe. I'm not trying to imply that the UK was some magical place for gay people or people with HIV and AIDS, but we can just see in terms of the social reality that the UK and Scotland did a lot of work to try and protect people versus the United States. Werewolves have often been a metaphor for mental illnesses. I think, however, when you go to making it an allegory for a real condition that largely impacts queer people and marginalized people, it's a very messy comparison. It puts queerness in the narrative, but without queer people. Then we go to gay Dumbledore. Man, I am old enough to remember the thriving McGonagall X Dumbledore fan base. Don't let them tell you it wasn't there. I remember it. People thought they were gonna fuck. It was October 2007 at Carnegie Hall. Rowling was asked by a fan if Dumbledore had ever found love. She went on to explain that he fell in love with the dark wizard Grindelwald and then turned away from him when Grindelwald got deeper into dark magic. Dumbledore fell in love with Grindelwald, and that added to his horror when Grindelwald showed himself to be what he was. Canon event, honestly. When your partner gets into dark magic without telling you, it just fucks up all your crystals. Now, this was in 2007, and she had just announced that the mentor, the great paternal figure of the books, was a gay man. This was huge. But just like now, people were asking why this wasn't in the books explicitly. There is nothing in the text that alludes to Dumbledore being gay or even gay-ish. Now, did I think Dumbledore was gay when I was reading the book? Yes, but for homophobic reasons. Anyone can have a twinkle in their eye and enjoy feminine hats. So it was actually problematic of me. And people have tried to make excuses for this by saying that Harry is a kid. We're seeing it through Harry's POV. Therefore, we would not know if Dumbledore was gay. And all I can say is that as heterosexual as these fucking books are, you cannot convince me that that is an actual argument. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna sit here and be reminded of the explanation about love potion and everything that happens in the Half-Blood Prince that we all had to be subjected to for you to tell me homosexual longing was out of the scope.
Okay. And to me, it was not a big deal. This is a very old man who has a very terrible job to do. And his gayness is not really... he's not really relevant. Very relevant to him as a character, because I always saw him as a very lonely character.
But Rowling really stood behind this decision and wrote this tweet in 2015 when someone said they couldn't see Dumbledore as gay. And she responded, maybe because gay people just look like people. Gay Dumbledore was the beginning of Rowling dropping these diversity nuggets into the narrative. Are there Jewish characters in Harry Potter? Of course! You've never seen them. We've never mentioned a single Jewish holiday, even though we mention Christmas all the time. But there is absolutely a Goldstein somewhere in this castle. I illustrate these points to say that the discussion around Rowling's politics and the book's flaws was always around, but it was always overlooked by the larger fan base that just wanted to enjoy things and turn their brains off, as they are wont to motherfucking do. In addition to not thinking it was that deep, they saw the pretty basic neoliberalism symbolism of magical fascist Nazis as enough of a radical progressive point that even though the series world building is very incomplete around that it meant that she was obviously a progressive person. And now she compares trans activists to Death Eaters. So really, we should always call into question her lazy character writing. And I will just say this, justice for Cho Chang, justice for Dean Thomas, justice for Kingsley Shacklebolt, because even in fanfiction, you guys make him into being such a fascist. And I'm just like, there's not enough of his character on the page to even give a whiff of that. But you guys will, make Black characters act really weird if you give them attention. Now, while being critical of Rowling's writing, I think most people just assumed it was typical white woman writing in the 90s. Her politics in general were okay. In general, she did vote and campaign against Scottish independence during 2014, but she was also anti-Brexit and anti-Trump. Everything changed in 2019. Actually, 2018. She liked a tweet. She liked a tweet which referred to trans women as men in dresses, but had her representative tell people that it was a middle-aged moment. People's fingers slip. Not everyone realizes that you can see people's likes. People optimistically, hopefully saw it as a one-off. It was not. Now we go to 2019 and we enter Maya Forstater. Forstater was a tax expert and also the daughter of the producer of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, who did not have her contract renewed by the think tank Center for Global Development. She'd done work for them, but due to her vile opinions about trans women that she shared online, they did not renew her contract, and so she sued them. She said that she was an absolutist about her views and argued that, quote, framing the question of transgender inclusion as an argument that male people should be allowed into women's spaces discounts women's rights to privacy and is fundamentally illiberal. It's like forcing Jewish people to eat pork. She believed that her opinions were protected under the Equality Act of 2010. So the Equality Act of 2010 brought together several pieces of anti-discrimination legislation to simplify things. Originally in 2019, the judge in this case wrote a 29-page judgment that was published, finding Forstater views were incompatible with human dignity and fundamental rights of others, and therefore not afforded protection under the Equality Act. Forstater said that the judgment removes women's rights and the right to freedom of belief and speech. So she lost her initial case, but not before raising more than £85,000 through crowdfunding and getting the public support of J.K. Rowling, who said that she stood with Maya. This is also what made her share the horrific tweet. Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real? Let me just say, as a Black woman, this is so clearly a loaded microaggression, and coached in this "I'm not a bigot" tone that just breeds frustration. And she would go on to say that she loves and supports trans people, but is just trying to protect women. She would then write an entire essay explaining her feelings about this, and I would say for more information and more in depth, you can watch any of ContraPoint's videos to get a deeper look at this. I am purely doing this from the cis perspective. If you could come inside my head and understand what I feel when I read about a trans woman dying at the hands of a violent man, you'd find solidarity and kinship. I have a visceral sense of terror in which those trans women will have spent their last seconds on earth, because I too have known moments of blind fear when I realized that the only thing keeping me alive was the shaky self-restraint of my attacker. I believe the majority of trans-identified people not only pose zero threat to others, but are vulnerable for all the reasons I've outlined. Trans people need and deserve protection. Like women, they're most likely to be killed by sexual partners. Trans women who work in the sex industry, particularly trans women of color, are at particular risk. Like every other domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor I know, I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who've been abused by men. On a surface level, that sounds all very reasonable, very nice. She's empathetic, she cares, right? But that's not her whole point. That's not why she's writing this, and that's not why she's defending the words of people like Maya. So I want trans women to be safe. At the same time, I don't want to make natal girls, which what the fuck is that even supposed to mean, and women less safe. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. That is the simple truth. And you know what I think is kind of humorous about this is that she's married to a man. A lot of these gender critical transphobes have all this to say about the inherent evil of the penis and men and women spaces, yet they share their homes with them. Maya appealed her case, and 2 years later it went in her favor, and she was given a payout of £91,500 and interest of £14,904.31. From 2020 forward, Rowling continued to triple and quadruple down on her gender-critical ideology, penning award-winning essays and riling up an already transphobic area, the UK, Turf Island, with her words. She's aligned herself with anti-feminist, anti-gay, and racist groups all in order to push this agenda, and it has been her life's purpose for years. ContraPoints has made 2 documentary-length videos about this. Jessie Earl was explicitly harassed by this woman. Trans women have already been explaining this over and over and over again. What Rowling has done is tap into the pre-existing transphobia and homophobia within society and soften it with this common sense language that has nothing to do with common sense, but has to do with social conditioning and colonial mindsets. I repeat, nothing has to do with common sense. She has attacked non-white cis women for not appearing like women. Colonial motherfucking white supremacy mindset. Transphobes are not new. The differences between sex and gender are not new if you know anything about how people talk about gender studies. The spectrum of these things, again, is not new. You knowing about it, you in a general way, and impacting your daily life is new, and only because we are actively being fed propaganda from people who don't read, don't critically think, and are willing to allow their weird insecurities and hangups to turn them into gender cops rather than talk to people about their actual experience. And it is especially heinous in the United Kingdom.
Author J.K. Rowling made it international news, but it's caused hurt and distress.
As an American, we have plenty of issues of transphobia in this country, and it is getting worse and worse, especially for trans people of color. But there's just something in the colonial waters over there that has made the cis women of the United Kingdom tap into their inner plantation mistress and really define their femininity through the subjugation of others. So it's a classic throwback. When they eat the heart-shaped herb and commune with their ancestors, they're just yelling at them about how England doesn't look the same anymore. The culture of the Anglo-Saxon is dying. Chicken tikka masala is actually a real Indian dish. One of the major sources for this section of the video is Sean Faye's The Transgender Issue, Trans Justice is Justice for All. It was a slightly dense but excellent read and full of citations. Highly recommend. It'll be part of the long ass list of sources. It was especially impactful to have a clear understanding of how hostile the UK media is and has been to trans people. I think as Americans, we don't really see this as much because the tabloid culture there is so extreme. Royal watchers might be more aware of this because of the relationship between the tabloids and the royal family, especially its women, and most recently its relationship to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, or Meghan Sussex, whatever you want to call yourself, girl. In this, Faye shares the story of Lucy Meadows, a teacher in the UK who transitioned and told her school. The school made an announcement about her transition, including her name change, in a school newsletter that quickly made the rounds into a local paper, and then the Daily Mail. Within 3 months of harassment, dead naming, calls to leave her job, Lucy Meadows took her own life in 2013. Columnist Richard Littlejohn led those attacks in national headlines titled, and I apologize for using these pronouns, "He's not only in the wrong body, he's in the wrong job." The implication and fear-mongering that this would be confusing for children, that it's hinted at something inherently perverse. Stonewall, the UK charity, published in 2017 that 45% of trans young people had attempted suicide at least once. Faye says, Meadows had not been a public figure or a celebrity, nor had she ever sought to be. She had wrestled privately with gender for many years, and her decision to transition was, by all accounts, not taken lightly. All she had done was be trans, and to be honest about who she was, continuing with a job she had been good at in a school that supported her. As much as the gender critical people pretend it's not, this is the result they want. What other reaction can be expected by telling people that they are perverse penis havers? Yet as shameless as this was, Faye explains that within a few years, trans activists were seen as the real bullies. A worthy movement to help a minority group has become a form of McCarthyism in bad wigs and fishnets, thanks to a bunch of bullies, trolls, and humorless misogynists. Feel too daunted to venture an opinion on anything transgender? Great. That's exactly how the bullies like it. I love how those with the most power call those who stand up for themselves bullies. They pretend they have some deep insight that they want to have, or that they want to ask really, pertinent questions about things. But really what they want to do is grill people about their genitals. They want to interrogate people on their sex change operations, their sex lives, their romantic lives, questions about shaving, not about how to make their lives easier. Just these freak show curiosity corners where people who are already dealing with massive harassment and discrimination are forced to justify and explain their existence in the face of reductive and hyperbolic talking points. To quote from Who's Afraid of Gender by the Judith Butler, imagine if you were Jewish and someone tells you that you are not. Imagine if you are a lesbian and someone laughs in your face and says you are confused since you are really heterosexual. Imagine if you are black and someone tells you are white, or that you are not racialized in this ostensibly post-racial world. Or imagine you are Palestinian and someone tells you that Palestinians do not exist, which people do. Who are these people who think that they have the right to tell you who you are and what you are not, and dismiss your own definition of who you are, who tell you that self-determination is not a right that you are allowed to exercise, who would subject you to medical and psychiatric review or mandatory surgical intervention before they are willing to recognize you in the name and sex you have given yourself, the ones to which you have arrived. Their definition is a form of effacement, and their right to define you is apparently more important than any right you have to determine who you are, how you live, what language comes closest to representing who you are. Whether it be trans kids in sports or trans children getting gender affirming care, they never want the opinions of trans people. They want to lecture at trans people, call them into question, and then mock them when they get angry. They will bring allies out to talk to them, but they will be cis people attempting to have an intellectual dialogue dialogue, while ignoring that we're talking about the lives of real people and that we can ask questions, you just can't be a fucking asshole about it. Just like they do with Black people and other marginalized groups. They tell you who you are, they tell you your lived reality isn't real, and they tell you that if you're offended, it's because you are the wrong person. Colonial mindset. I'm going to say that a lot this video in this part of the section. And I'm not just saying that to make some piffy comparison for the sake of it. Even the trans women in sports argument fills me with rage. As I explained in a previous video about challengers, which I know y'all didn't watch, but that's okay. Black cis women in sports have historically been accused of being men. Althea Gibson, a tennis player, was forced to take a testosterone test. In the 1960s, Black athletes were forced to segregate because they represented a literal threat to white supremacy.
Remember when they used to say I look too mannish? Black girl magic.
This is why there is a constant obsession in sports of having a great white hope, which we are now seeing play out with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese in the WNBA. We have seen through history time and time again the threat of Black freedom or any kind of non-white person's freedom. Whenever there's a chance for them to get more rights or them to get more progress in the world, people will say, well, what about the women and children? Parentheses, white women and children. And so they will treat people this way, marginalize them, and then hide the hand that they hit you with. And to me, just as someone who likes sports casually, don't worry, I'm not FD signifier. I'm not gonna make you watch a sports video. I learned my lesson from the first time. But the entire trans women in sports argument, even if I just took every single other aspect of it out of it, right? The thing that even doesn't make sense to me, if we're gonna use common sense, is that people don't pay women in sports their due. The idea that a man who is not trans, right, would become trans in order to dominate women's sports is just a bird-brained idea. Brittany Griner is a 3-time Olympic gold medalist who played basketball in Russia because the WNBA doesn't pay well. And so she went to a country with horrible LGBTQ rights as an out lesbian to make a living. And you think that this is what? You think this is the winning coal? You thought Joanna Man was a true story? Is that what you guys are saying? There was just a post a couple of weeks ago about all the New York teams, and they left out New York Liberty, even though they are the current WNBA champions. At the time of recording, they are on a 5-game winning streak, but all anyone is ever talking about is the Knicks maybe making it in 7. And you think a cis man would purposely become a marginalized identity to do that? To be overworked, underpaid, undervalued on purpose? You think that? To use the TikTok sound, let me move the mic away from me slightly because I'm loud. You are under spells, people. It's also so jarring to me how infantilizing gender critical people treat trans men, dismissing their experiences as a social contagion among teenage lesbians and girls with autism who are either seeking to escape the misogyny that comes with developing an adult female body or who are shamed and distressed by homophobia. I'm cis. I'm bisexual, I've been a tomboy, I'm a feminist. I've never wanted to be a boy. I just want to not be in a patriarchy. And I wouldn't even want to be a boy to escape patriarchy because as a feminist, I know it doesn't even work that way. But even when I was a kid, I wanted to be a girl. I wanted to play a girl in video games. That's why I play so many fighting games. I wanted to always be a kick-ass woman. I want to be Sindel. When Pokemon Crystal let me be a girl, I think that feeling I had was the closest to what I think genuine euphoria is like. I knew myself in that way then. And even as someone who is cis, the fact that I think back to how much it meant to me at 8 to have a video game where I could be my gender, why wouldn't I believe someone who says that about their own experiences about not having their gender match? Even in that shallow example of just wanting my video game self to match my actual gender, if I understand the connection there, if I understand that, I understand why another 8-year-old would feel a disconnect, because you you're socialized and you know what these things mean in concept, and you can kind of feel when it isn't matching up. Despite all that sass, I do understand that there are questions people genuinely have, and that is fair. But I would just remind you, especially all my fellow marginalized people, how irritating it is to have to explain your existence and humanity to people. I have seen two things that cis women kind of bristle up against whenever trans women and other trans inclusive feminists try to explain their embrace of transness into womanhood. And those two things usually are that gender is a social construct and that gender is a performance. There's also like the offense of cis and certain words. And I just would remind people that certain words are used for an academic and medical purposes. And let's be clear, at one point in time, there was a group of queer women who wanted to spell women with a Y. Okay? It's not that deep. Something being a social construct means that it doesn't exist in objective reality. It exists because human beings give it power. Now, that does not mean that things that are social constructs don't matter. Race, money, countries, as well as gender are all social constructs, but we know those things are important because of how it allows society to function. Gender roles are crafted by the dominant society and then trickle down to everyone else. Men and women, because both of them are social constructs, are taught by society how they are meant to act in alignment with their gender. Hence why people will also say it is in part a performance. And I think Judith Butler puts it really well. We inherit gender. When I was born, I didn't have an inherent concept of womanhood. I learned that from women around me, from my mother, from my sisters, from Ashley and Topanga. How you dress as a woman signifies things to the world. I remember my mother telling me as like a teenager that wearing red lipstick or red nail polish was too adult for me, right? Like that is not an objective reality, right? That wearing red is too adult for a child. That's not a real thing, right? But red and hypersexuality are linked in media. That is why you see it on all the like Lolita covers, this use of like dark pinks and reds to allude to sexuality. And so those colors become linked even though that is not an objective reality. Red is not inherently sex. And we know this even when it comes to how we do beauty and race. Wearing your hair naturally is a performance of Black identity as well. It means different things, sometimes political, at other times fashionable. It can also be exotified. Even in terms of male gender performance, men are constantly, especially now, having to prove their masculinity. They police each other in how they behave. They normalize hypersexuality even if it is abusive, because patriarchy tells them that certain things make them men. And certain fashion choices evolve as being for men and not for men. I mean, when you look at Milli Vanilli, right? They were sex symbols. Like, women wanted to sleep with these guys. And when I watched the documentary, it's a very good documentary, actually, it's on Paramount Plus. I was like, oh, right. The codifiers of queerness were not always the same. So people look at that and saw straight. There's a reason why certain fashion choices have signified queerness or alternativeness throughout the years. They are pushing against the social and performative nature of identity. There is no one universal beauty standard because it is objective. And we see beauty trends in a certain way become a way to indicate certain identities, like the trad wife conservative style with the milkmaid dresses, something I take personal offense to as someone who is milkmaid dress coded. Skims is now making these shirts with like fake nipple rings, which again, I find personally offensive because that used to mean something in society. To have nipple piercings used to mean you was a bad bitch, okay? I got mine done because of Rihanna in the Wild Thoughts videos.
I don't know if you could take it. No, you wanna see me naked, naked, naked.
For some people, tattoos are not feminine. For some people, they are. These statements do not ignore that it is a lived reality for those who occupy, in this context, a gendered space. It simply illustrates that we, as individual people, did not create them for ourselves, nor did our mothers, nor our grandmothers, and so on. We inherit these roles through social context. that created. And therefore, there is not one universal objective reality, but the reality we have inherited. Therefore, it can be changed. Let's not forget, it used to be a crime, like an actual crime for women to wear pants because it went against the social role that women were expected to play. Transness and non-binary identities are not the first time that humans have pushed back against the idea that their gender assigned at birth should dictate how they move in the real world. And I don't know about all of you, but I don't want to be defined solely by my biology, by my womb, because that same biology has been used to tell women that they are inherently other things.
30-year-old Adriana Smith was about 9 weeks pregnant when she started having bad headaches in February.
They did a CT scan and she had blood clots all in her head. So they had asked me if they could do a procedure to relieve them, and I said yes. But then they called me back and they said that they couldn't do it.
Because of Georgia's heartbeat bill, which bans abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected, her family says they weren't given any say in what happens next.
It is a slippery slope to put all of the weight into what it means to be anything on purely biology. When we are named a gender, however, we are entered into a class of people so named. And if we rename ourselves, we move into another category whose history no one individually possesses. Gender categories change throughout time, and feminism has always relied on the historically changing character of gender categories in order to demand changes in the way that women and men are defined and treated. If these were timeless categories, they could not be redefined, which means that whatever category of woman once meant is what it means forever. I really love this book, by the way. You've heard me emphasize the racial and colonial aspects of this whole thing, and I just want to illustrate that point one more time, right? So the Center for Global Development is a nonprofit with the goal of reducing global poverty and inequality by encouraging policy change in the United States and other rich countries through rigorous research and active engagement with the policy community. They have a solid ranking among charities, and while I'm not here to say they are perfect, I didn't do that much research into this part. I think someone who claims to be fighting for women and girls would not take money out of the hands of a charity that does work to help impoverished women and girls around the world. That's suspicious. That's weird. But this is what J.K. Rowling supports, loudly and proudly. In fact, she just announced on the 24th of May that she is starting the J.K. Rowling Women's Fund, and it will be entirely funded by her. And its goal is offering legal funding for cases concerning what she calls women's sex-based rights, entirely funded by the author.
You're 25 years old. You get drunk off half a beer, and you read the Harry Potter series in your spare time.
Okay, so there are a series of arguments you will get when it comes to Harry Potter consumption and why people didn't actually be able to do it, and these are the big ones. A, separating the art from the artist. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism, so I need the limited edition for my mental health. B, there are other problematic authors. Why is it always the female authors? C, we should read from diverse authors and authors we don't agree with. D, she's already too rich, so why can't I buy a video game? And why do I have to care in the first place? I read to turn my brain off as an escapism for my mental health / comfort. Let's get into it. A, separating the art from the artist. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism, so I need the limited edition for my mental health. Separating the art from the artist is an aspect of literary theory about reading the text for itself without looking into the author for insights into what is written. It is a tool for critical thinking and textual analysis reading. Ethical consumption under capitalism is talking about the fact that we do have, because of capitalism and monopolies, food deserts, limited mobility access, especially for people with disabilities. People have a limited amount of ethical choices they can make on necessities. Buying a collector edition of a book you already own is not a necessity. Acknowledging that we live in a capitalist society is not an excuse to not make ethical choices. There are other problematic authors. Why is it always female authors? Now, I will acknowledge problematic is a spectrum, but J.K. Rowling isn't treated as a pariah because of casual cultural appropriation, though she has been accused of that. Fatphobia, which she has done. Casual sexism and racism, which she has also done. She is actively being treated this way because she uses her money directly, by her own admission, to fund anti-trans movements. I think we can put that above authors who get criticized for writing dark romance. People are allowed to be disappointed in the public stances and opinions of authors, and you can still like those authors. That's fine. You will, however, though, be questioned about it if you highlight it on a public platform. People are allowed to be upset about the Breonna Taylor post that is still on Sarah J. Maas's profile. People are allowed to be upset that the 60s scoop was an inspiration for a cozy fantasy. And when people bring it up, you can defend it, you can explain your stance, you can have a dialogue, or just take the L. I have so much more respect for people who are like, yeah, I know, I'm so disappointed in this aspect of it. I really respect the criticism. I understand why people are uncomfortable, and I do read more diversely than just this. Also, a lot of you guys don't read male authors, so you don't know they aren't getting dragged. Like, if you saw what people said about Jay Kristoff, you wouldn't think this. I also find it very offensive, personally, when people act as though uplifting female authors means only finding any interest in like cis-het narratives that were written in the past 5 years. There is a long, rich history of female fantasy and sci-fi that is right there and critically acclaimed. It is not always a gender thing. Sometimes the thing is bad. We should read from diverse authors and authors we don't agree with. All right. I love Dune. It is one of my favorite book series of all time. I have 3 different copies of this first book. Frank Herbert's political views were muddled. He was a Republican, but horrible to his ex-wife and gay son in a very homophobic way, which, you know, isn't shocking with the Baron being like the only explicitly not straight character in the series. I love the Dune novels, but when people have issues with it, and especially talk about the way in which it uses Arabic and North African culture in ways that are very muddled, I agree. There is a rich collection of articles and essays about this because it is a book. It is imperfect. The author is imperfect. He is also dead. All right, I went to go see Starship Troopers last year and it was great, but I knew that the film was a satirical adaptation of the book, so I got the book. Henlin started off as very liberal early in his life and later became a conservative and very pro-military. His writing of female characters has always been really problematic in certain circles because they are both sort of like empowered female leaders, but also act in very stereotypical ways. He was a big believer in individualism and really wanted his male characters to be kind of like ubermenschy. It's like every dude he writes has to be like the main character of Solo Leveling. It's very shonen anime coded. I read this because it is sort of like the originator of the military sci-fi genre. I think that's really interesting. So it was kind of like an academic read in that sense. He's also dead. I don't agree with his politics in a lot of ways. I do think his work has literary merit. And yeah, it's very available on thriftbooks.com, which is not a sponsor of this video, but I use them quite a bit. This is an oldie, but a goodie. 6 Wives, The Queen of Henry VIII by David Starkey. David Starkey is a paternalistic conservative, pro-Brexit gay, yet somehow still weird about same-sex marriage. He is racist. He said that Rishi Sunak was not fully grounded in British culture because he is Hindu. He is also an Anne Boleyn glazer. I got this book in my early 20s because it was one of the more reputable biographies of all 6 wives. It's no longer my favorite 6-wife biography. I can put the ones that I like on screen, but I do keep it as a resource because I've, read a bunch and it is fairly well written and readable. I probably would not buy it again, but I keep it in my library as a resource. Harold Bloom's Western canon. I have my degree in English with a focus on theory. Therefore, this book was really relevant to my studies, but I also appreciated the contrarian opinion from time to time because it helps frame counter arguments. I also thrifted this copy. Harold Bloom is dead, but his impact is really interesting. I think he sort of was one of the first anti-DEI people I ever remember reading about. His stuff is really relevant, and I think while I do disagree with him, I do like having him as a reference point for a point of view that I disagree with on hand. And also, what I think is interesting is that even though we disagree on sort of like the theories of resentment, I do have some of his similar taste in books. So it is interesting looking at it from different perspectives. But the big one for this section of the video is Fables by Bill Willingham. I got really into Fables in my late 20s, in my early 20s, late teens. I didn't really know anything about his politics until after I got this. And Bill Willingham is one of the most conservative men in comics. He said that this book series was intended from the beginning to be a metaphor for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And once you know that, and he is very pro-Israel, it's hard not to see. So I have this copy of it. I have not gotten rid of it, but I am transferring it to my parents' house, and I haven't gotten any other ones because I just felt uncomfortable. It has some nostalgia for me when I reread it. I've tried to reread it maybe once just to like see the elements into it, but I couldn't enjoy it the same way. But it was a really impactful series. There are still aspects of it that I really, really enjoy. I have a lot of nostalgia for it, but I don't recommend it. Yeah, it's a book series that meant a lot for me. I think it's really narratively compelling, but yeah, I strongly disagree with his politics. And I think whenever this argument comes up about reading diversely and reading people who you disagree with, I think it's often intellectually dishonest because you're not reading it to understand a disagreement. You're not reading it to better understand a point. You just want to read it and not think about the author's actions. And mind you, I don't think everyone needs to research the people they read as intensely as I do. Like, I think if you're a regular civilian and you're not like a book talker or a booktuber or someone who makes their career advertising and promoting books, you are allowed a lot of leeway in what you keep in your personal library to an extent. But if you're just a regular civilian, it's one thing. If you were going to build a platform, if you're a regular civilian, it's one thing. But if you're building a platform, people are going to ask you about your thoughts on an author. I also don't think that people read like books by classic problematic authors and it's like a pure endorsement, unless it's like, Mein Kampf. But in general, I don't think that everyone who reads The Fountainhead or Brideshead Revisited is doing so in solidarity with the author's politics. People are allowed to be curious.
I've yet to make it through it.
Really? Try. The Fountainhead is a classic.
Yeah, but Ayn Rand is a political nut.
Yeah, but nobody could write a 40-page monologue the way that she could.
And I just think that if you're going to use the argument that you are reading for diverse opinions, you should probably be able to tell me what those diverse opinions are. You don't have to put your bookshelves in your videos. Like, if you'd asked me about any piece of art on this wall and why I like it and any issues about the fan base, I could probably tell you because I put it behind me. So that people know what my taste is, and it's including who I'm voting for in the New York mayoral race. D, she's already too rich, so why can't I buy a video game? Because she can run out of money. If people don't give it to her, she is donating and using it to fund these things. Not giving her money would make a difference. Boycotts can work. I don't know why people have decided not to use their buying power politically. So on 30th of May, Forbes made an article titled J.K. Rowling is a billionaire again. And it states in the following: in the 4 years since she began posting about transgender rights in 2020, incorrect, but still, Forbes estimates Rowling has earned more than $80 million per year from the sales of her books and the vast litany of Potterverse brand extensions, including movies, TV shows, theme parks, video games, theater, and merchandise. Even after factoring the high UK taxes and her extensive charity ventures, she has comfortably rejoined the billionaire ranks with a network of $1.2 billion, according to Forbes estimates. It also states in this article that despite the 2022 flop of Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore, Rowling's money was secured in other ways. By that point, tickets for her Harry Potter and the Cursed Child stage play were selling steadily on Broadway, in London's West End, and 5 other locations around the world, grossing more than $1 billion since its premiere in 2016, of which Rowling shares in the profits. In 2023, a new video game, Hogwarts Legacy, sold 24 million copies, the best-selling game of that year, grossing another $1 billion. Because of that momentum, as I will say later in this video, I'm just going to put it here anyway. Because of that momentum, quote, this is not me saying this is a quote, Warner Brothers was eager to double down on Potter projects. When CEO David Zaslav was hired in 2022, he flew to Scotland to meet with Rowling to find a way to develop new Wizarding World content. While Rowling held the rights to prequels and spin-offs, Warner Brothers still controlled the material from the original 7 novels, which is why the studio pursued a remake of the original series. Eventually, the project secured Rowling's blessing in 2023. So, finally, why do I have to care in the first place? I read to turn my brain off as escapism for my mental health. I'm going to tell you a secret. You don't have to care. It just says a lot about you that when it comes between human rights of your fellow people and nostalgia, you pick nostalgia. You know, trans people are getting murdered, getting their human rights denied, and you want to buy another version of a book you already own and then make yourself the victim for putting yourself in a politically volatile situation. And I think what is funny about this escapism and turn my brain off stuff is that people do this with books with like very clear political messages and then are upset when people acknowledge that. Like, you will read The Hunger Games and come out of that trilogy more concerned with Katniss's romantic partner than the actual politics of the book that you ignore to hate Gale. You have to be reminded that President Snow is evil because he got played by a hot white guy with a buzz cut and somehow decided that Lucy Gray was manipulating him the whole time. Great. You know, you're in a fandom where the core tension of the series is a group of magic supremacists want to subjugate other people, but then make unironic thirst traps about said Death Eaters. And I just have to say for the record, because I've always felt this way, those dark mark tattoos, always a weird choice. There are so many things you could have gotten. That was never... It's a little messy. But I can't even blame Potter fans, because considering that people market the stormtroopers, it really is, you know, branding. Fandom has never been perfect. And I think we've always had elements of cringe, elements that we wanted to keep more in the shadows. And social media, but especially post-COVID, TikTok, has allowed people who likely would not have had an interest in engaging that much, being able to do so with very little issue or guardrails to protect the community that already existed. As a result, we're having very agonizing conversations about what fandom is, what is fandom etiquette, and of course, in the case of Harry Potter, what to do about the Harry Potter fandom and its allegiance to the IP in spite of its author. And for me, at this point, it comes down to something fairly simple. Harry Potter fans in general had the opportunity, time and time again, to make choices that would separate themselves from J.K. Rowling. Most of the diehard fans of this series have the books, have the movies, the official merch that truly matters for them. They don't need anymore. And yet any attempt to move away from this passive consumerism of a product that does funnel money into an active hate campaign is treated as bullying and scolding. This was highlighted during the issues of Hogwarts Legacy, which I'm even loath to bring up because what a fucking shit show that whole thing was for a game that was not even good. But what sticks out to me is the infantilization. Somehow no one who isn't a member of the trans or queer community is expected to know about J.K. Rowling's politics. And when people bring it up, share videos that illustrated the issue in good faith, the goalpost moves. all of a sudden gamers are being impacted. The workers of the game industry are being impacted. Never mind that you do not support the protests or strikes of these people, or don't support the games that they tell you that they had to do massive crunch time to. No. And what was sad to me then and sadder to me now is that the solution was always very simple. Like, it didn't even have to be a boycott. Just don't buy the game the first few weeks, make a stand, and then you can buy it on sale. Yeah, it's like streamers who I'm sure meant well and would probably, funny enough, get this more since so many of us are boycotting right now for political reasons, seemed to at the time be annoyingly obtuse that somehow they could shame J.K. Rowling. She is shameless, and it's not a coincidence that following the game's moderate success, this TV show remake was announced. Warner Brothers has seen that people do not care, that even when given a way to consume Harry Potter without spending money, people will find a way to spend money anyway, through the binding of fan fiction. And as someone who reads fan fiction, loves it, again, open tabs, fan fiction podcast, me, Tappy Toeclaws, and Amy the Amazonian. It's not safe for work, very queer, and very raunchy. Someone who loves it stands behind my favorite ships, problematic as they are. The disappointing thing about being a queer woman who loves reading is the amount of people who want art to be apolitical out of a fear of being perceived as a bad person. Just because you have convinced yourself that it is 2009 choice feminism praxis to enjoy this franchise without politics doesn't make it true. I have been on Reddit boards for many parts of this fandom, parts you would think know better, but they don't. And currently right now, the two biggest parts of the Harry Potter fandom are the Marauders and the Hermione community. And regardless of how you feel about either of those branches of the fandom, or how they probably feel about each other, both of these fan bases at their core are about highlighting and subverting the narratives that J.K. Rowling failed to put into the text, of exploring what would happen if more attention were put into themes of queerness, otherness, Hermione's life for more than a few paragraphs a book, giving characters actual growth and consequences for their actions during the war, of wanting to build a more inclusive world, of actually de-radicalizing characters and seeing them have true growth. And yet when brought up how people are dealing with their fandom and their love of this series, as well as JKR's politics, you'll see people shrug and say, we shouldn't have to care. It shouldn't matter. And it's honestly embarrassing. Like, on top of just bigotry, it's also embarrassing. Taking even the fact that J.K. Rowling is a horrible person out of it, and we do the whole faux separating the art from the artist. The overall message of the series, ironically, is about not giving in to bigotry. Even separating the art from the artist is not possible because people are so nostalgia pilled that to them, Harry Potter is the best thing they've ever seen, they've ever read. And as someone who's been in this fandom for ages, they can't even handle discourse about the way the book as written is, with a touch of critical thinking, or even recognizing that Rowling did not invent the concept of a magical school. You know, the anti-intellectualism and making everything into capital, even if it doesn't make sense, has only allowed Harry Potter to fester as a fandom that gives an alarming amount of power to its creator, and the desire of publications to tap into this more explicitly than ever before. As I was getting ready to film this, the casting of the new trio of the Harry Potter series was announced, and everyone began trying to figure out what race this young girl is who's playing Hermione because she's dark. You know, she could be mixed race, she could just be Greek, but what she explicitly is 11. There are a lot of queer people, trans people, non-binary people, asexual people who have very complicated feelings about this and have tried to do deconstructing work, who have tried to be critical about this in these spaces. They are trying their best. It's everyone else who's really fucking it up for them. And I'm tired. I'm tired of the lack of empathy. I'm tired of people enjoying being empty-headed. I'm tired of the straw man arguments. The grace has not been earned, not when the fandom is being explicitly racist, and transphobic with a shrug, because they've been shrugging every time anyone brought up anything having to do with this series and race and gender and any issues. The reality is the Harry Potter fandom is acting like this because they've never had to care. So now the only question is how many? How many lives have to be destroyed? How many trans people have to die or become stealth? Meanwhile, cis men who run the government do nothing to deal with rape or child marriage or gender inequality or the rights of the oppressed. Nada. Is this women's rights? Before the Nazis rose to power in Germany, there were strides being made in the sociology of sexuality. People were expanding these concepts. Magnus Hirschfeld, a gay German Jewish physician, founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee and the World League for Sexual Reform. He is considered to be one of the first advocates for homosexual and trans rights. Hirschfeld was impacted by both the trial of Oscar Wilde and the patients he saw who tried to self-harm to escape their pain. He was doing this work in the 1890s. When the Nazis came to power in the 1930s, they burned his library in this Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin. We lost so much information because of fascists. We would be so much more further ahead in this topic if so much key information didn't go up in flames. Because when people have these questions about puberty blockers or trans people in sports and all these kind of things, they don't try to find the information. They stop it from ever being consulted. They are trying to actively push trans people out of public life so that we never have to integrate, so that we never have to ask these questions, to make them a permanent other on purpose. They are limiting them on purpose, and they're limiting you on purpose. I'll say this too. I am a cis Black woman. I have more in common with trans Black women than cis white women. These gender critical scammers want you to believe that there is some universal woman experience they are protecting. White cis women are not a universal standard of womanhood, especially not for me. Like, sorry, I'm a descendant of chattel slavery. Black enslaved women were often biologically female and offered none of the social protections and expectations of womanhood because they were not considered people. But now you don't know what social constructions are. You understood a social construct when you were enslaving us, dismantling us, putting your ideology onto us, moving us from place to place, selling us, selling our children, raping us, beating us. You knew then. Fuck off. If you're in the fandom and you want to be able to enjoy the fandom, you have to be louder about all this bullshit. Like, I'm sorry. You have to look to your neighbor who's doing bullshit and say, cut that shit out. So this is what this is. It's a call out, but also a call in, because I know that there are people in this community who just need the permission to be able to say, you guys are disappointing me. Like, I'm sorry. If you ship Hermione, and I'm sitting here as a Hermione shipper myself, and your favorite ship is between literally the scolder in chief and the person who needs scolding the most, and you're going to sit here and tell me that you don't care about the politics of what's going on in the world? You're a joke. Do better. Just because the Marauders have created all of these queer headcanons, that means nothing. That means nothing if the only reason why you're not excited about this new show is because it's not the Marauders. So if it was the Marauders, then you don't care that she's a transphobe and gonna get money off of this. So for a lot of this video, I have been very curt and very stiff, and I wanted to take this moment before I get to the last line of the video to be in a more civil control state. Because I do not enter this conversation as someone with any illusions of like moral superiority, anything like that. I was raised in an anti-Black, anti-queer, anti-intellectual society. I know what it's like to unlearn things, and I loved Harry Potter, okay? I still, on a certain level, love Harry Potter. I still enjoy Harry Potter fan fiction. It was a huge part of my childhood. I sent one of those letters to J.K. Rowling and got her signed autograph. I don't know where it is. I honestly thank God for that. And so giving it up was not easy. I just at a certain point knew that I did not want to do anything that would economically benefit her. And even now, I know people who have turned down opportunities to work on projects related to Harry Potter through Warner Brothers and have turned it down because of her actions. And these are freelancers who need the money, not actors, not young actors, just people. And I know that we cannot totally moralize everything that we consume, especially since we are in the imperial core, we are in the capital. But I do think that when we are seeing transphobia be normalized and people using us as cis women, although not all of us all the time, as the perpetual damsels in the tower that we need to be protected, we should speak out, because we know that it's not for our benefit. It is to preserve systems that do not benefit us. Simone Biles was forced to give an apology to Riley Gaines, who is comfortable bullying trans people, including trans children and teens, because she has a platform, all after tying for 5th place with a trans woman. Like, all things aside, she's a loser, and I don't know why she's giving a platform. I don't think, you got 5th place. You think because you tied but a trans woman and you didn't get to hold the trophy, that is something that literally Republicans would laugh about. You know what I mean? Like, from the people who are like, you participation trophies, you're literally starting an anti-trans campaign over someone's participation trophy. Like, 5th place? 5th? When I heard it was 5th place, that's what really threw me out. I was like, girl, the snowflakes. And Biles is correct in her statement that she made, and anyone who understands the history of gender, sex, especially its intersections with race, should understand that the language being used to talk about trans people in this public eye is demonizing and stigmatizing. It's not about learning. It's not about creating a safe space for anyone. And it's also very telling that Gaines used Simone Biles' abuse at the hands of Larry Nassar against her. We are literally in a society where cis men perform the majority of sexual abuse against everyone, and yet trans women become the boogeyman. And yet in the very same circles that people will participate in this, these are the same women that say that men and boys are under attack. So with one mouth, they are attempting to make cis boys victims, because for the first time in history, they're not thriving the way that they are supposed to under a patriarchy. And yet also saying that trans girls and women are inherently violent and suspect because they are male. So the same people who are, again, telling feminists that we've gone too far, we've demonized men, are at the same time using rhetoric that demonizes biological maleness. And it's just like, you're doing doublespeak. You're not being consistent. And I know there's a lot of discussion and division over the issue of how does fan fiction and fan art fit into this entire thing? And I kind of touched on it in the video, but I wanted to come back and say this. I think that it is okay to be suspicious about anyone who consumes anything Harry Potter related if you are a trans person and a queer person. I think it's totally fair. I would only highlight this one point. There are a lot of trans, non-binary, and queer people who still engage with fan fiction and have always done so. Fan fiction has always been a queer space. It's not as much right now, and I think we need to acknowledge that the lack of gatekeeping around these spaces has made it so that we have a lot of people in these communities who I don't think should be there. Honestly, they don't come with the good vibes, they don't come with good intentions, but they are here nonetheless. So I think we need to be aware of the fact that, like, what we are dealing with is a lot of issues that are not at the root of the average fan community, but an issue with Harry Potter specifically. And a lot of queer people use this fan work as a way of consuming something that they love that does not financially benefit J.K. Rowling. And while I understand the argument that it keeps the brand in the public eye and all those kind of things, I would just say that if keeping a brand in the public eye meant that there were going to be financial incentives for everyone, then Yuri on Ice would have had a second season by now. It would have at least had the movie. What makes Harry Potter profitable is because people buy stuff, and people need to stop buying stuff. Stop buying stuff. Stop buying it from the stores. Stop watching it. Stop engaging it. If you already have the books, reread them. No one's coming into your homes to snatch out your books. I have a friggin' Harry Potter wand that I still have. I think it's Harry Potter. I get a lot of wands. I have it. No one's coming to steal it away from me. I have a Slytherin shirt. I have my silly Hermione mugs. No one's coming to steal them from me, because also I got those from Etsy. But there are ways to ethically consume this thing that you love without giving your money to her. And when you give your money to her, you are crossing that Rubicon. You are now being complicit actively. And there are so many people doing that focusing on the people who are not giving her any money, I don't think is not that it's not necessary. I think it's a poor use of resources because they're not the ones causing this issue. It is the general public's general passive consumption of Harry Potter and attempting to remove themselves from it, even as they are physically giving her money. So I think that should be the priority. I think we can have our interpersonal conflicts about fanfiction and fan art. I think like definitely promoting it online is definitely now a lot more dubious. I think a lot of that is just, unfortunately, capitalism doing what it's going to do. And a lot of that is, of course, sorry to say, a lot of cishet white women ruining it for a lot of people once again. Nothing to be done about that. However, I do think that, again, the incentive should be making people at least double think before they go see The Cursed Child, because that's not people reading fan fiction. That's not people doing fan art. That's just the general Harry Potter public, and they are the problem. More so than anybody else, besides J.K. Rowling and Warner Brothers. Well, I don't know how to wrap this up any neater, so, don't buy Harry Potter stuff. Don't be an asshole. Right now in New York City, we're seeing a highly contested mayoral race with a ranked choice election on June 24th. With so many candidates and so much media coverage, it can be hard to navigate all the noise. And that's exactly why I use Ground News. I myself am aligned with UAW and will be ranking Zoran Mamdani first. Mamdani has been trailing Cuomo this election, but things have been changing since his fairly recent endorsement by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, something I found out about on Ground News. Ground News helps cut through media bias and information overload by giving you a clear, unbiased view of how different outlets cover the same story. It shows you a visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and even media ownership, so you can decide for yourself rather than having headlines decide for you. Take Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's recent endorsement of Zoran Mamdani, for example. On the left, MSNBC's headline reads, AOC just gave a boost to New York's new socialist superstar. Meanwhile, on the right, Louder, with Crowder, frames it as, woke socialist mayoral candidate promises taxpayer-funded free stuff while speaking in Hindi. This story has been covered by more than 70 sources, with 50 coming from the left and only 24 coming from the right. Using Ground News, you can quickly compare these headlines, apply filters, and see source counts, so you're never stuck in an echo chamber. And here is the best part. I'm offering an exclusive 40% discount on the Ground News Vantage subscription, which includes unlimited access, detailed bias tracking, and other premium features. This special offer is only available for a limited time. Support independent journalism and a clearer picture of the world by trying Ground News Vantage today. Again, visit ground.news/princessweeks or scan the QR code on screen or click the link below to claim your discount now.